Hello, it's Brian from Brew Art, and this week we are going to work with alcohol inks and using that on synthetic paper. We're going to try some experiments and show how we could use those in a few pieces of art. And what we're going to need is some alcohol inks, and it would be helpful to have some things like some blending solution or isopropyl alcohol. A little squirt bottle will be handy, some Frisket. I'll also be using some salt, some spray paint, a straw, and a couple crayons. And today I'm going to be using this Artfinity Synthesis paper. It is a synthetic paper, very similar to Yupo. Both of these are basically plastic sheets with a drawing surface on them, and they're completely waterproof. You could also use mineral paper, which is very similar to Yupo, but it does absorb a little bit of the ink. Because these paper surfaces are pretty non-porous, that will give you some more open time with your inks, so you can do more interesting things with them. So getting on to my first project, I am going to use some Frisket, and this will protect the white of the synthetic paper as I put ink on it. And once I take that Frisket off, we'll be able to see that nice white. There are, of course, a number of ways that you can use alcohol inks. I'm going to use a pretty popular method, just using some blending solution or some isopropyl alcohol and adding inks on top of that. The blending solution will keep the inks wet and will help them to move. This is one of the really cool and exciting things you can do with alcohol inks when you're using a non-porous paper like these synthetic papers. To move inks around, you could do things like tilting the paper. You can use a straw to blow the inks around. I've seen people use hair dryers and other methods. And this type of work really ends up being pretty abstract, but really colorful. And that's the nice thing about using these synthetic papers, is they really keep the ink on the top, and so you get those really vibrant colors. You saw there that I used a little bit of spray paint, and you can see how that kind of split up the ink a little bit. And I'm using a straw here to kind of distribute things. And then finally taking off that Frisket, that masking fluid, and that's going to reveal that nice white pattern that I had put down on there. It is a truly satisfying thing to do this. I love taking that stuff up. It's a lot of fun. And you know, I can't leave well enough alone. I seem to have to overwork everything, and a lot of times I regret it. So I'm using some alcohol inks as paints here. And this works out again pretty well on this type of paper. It stays wet long enough that you can move it around, and it blends pretty nicely, especially if you use some of the blending fluid. If you try to do this on a normal paper, like a watercolor paper, the inks would absorb really quickly, and you wouldn't be able to move them around, and you'd be kind of limited as to what you could do with it. This piece ended up being very colorful, and I kind of like it. And take a look at this silver spray paint. I just love the pattern that left. So in this project, I decided I was going to do something and kind of work on the negative space. And I'll start this off kind of typically like I did the last one, with a variety of different types of ink, with a blending solution, and as you can see there, I used some twine in order to sort of move things around instead of using a straw, although I'll end up using a straw. I'm just experimenting here. And here I'm using some salt. This works a lot like it does with a watercolor. The salt absorbs things in its near vicinity and leaves a little bit a wider area underneath. And if you spritz it with a little bit of alcohol, you see it will disperse the ink. And the ink will kind of rejoin a little bit, but it'll leave a little bit of a texture. So I said that we're going to be working on the negative space. And what I'm going to do is use some of that nice inked image, and I'm going to mask that off. I found a nice little maple leaf outline, and just using some Frisket to protect an area of that background. And because this is a synthetic paper, if I apply more alcohol or something that's going to move or blend this ink, you'll actually be able to take off nearly all, if not all, of the ink that's on the page. Of course, it won't touch the stuff that's underneath the masking fluid, and so you can end up really with two different things going on. You have your original background, which is now going to become the maple leaf, and then you could do a new background, perhaps in a different color. And I decided to go with something a little bit darker to try to highlight this leaf. This process I did on this back end of this piece of art really didn't work out very well. But, you know, I'm going to show you anyway, just because I'm experimenting. I don't always know what's going to happen. And, you know, some interesting things were learned at the very least. I decided I was going to return to my bubbles, which I've done for the past few weeks. And I really thought that this was going to be something that was going to set off that leaf pattern. So I put on the bubbles, and you can see the nice little bubble pattern that ended up on the paper. The problem was that as those bubbles popped, because, again, this is a synthetic paper, all it really did was move the ink around, and it didn't really do much to leave that bubble pattern. And just to make sure that I would never truly enjoy this piece, I, for some reason, decided to put this border around it, and I didn't like it. But it is fun to take off that masking fluid. And there are still some really pretty colors in there, and I do like that. I decided I wanted to do something a little bit different and try to do a portrait that would utilize the alcohol inks in all their glory. So I used some alcohol markers here on the Yupo, and that was a challenge. Because the paper doesn't absorb the ink, it really ended up looking pretty splotchy, but I don't think that's a bad thing. It's just not what I expected, and so it kind of gave it a different sort of look, which you will get to see near the end of this project. I was really excited about doing the hair here. This was kind of supposed to be the star of the show. A nice ginger redhead with these beautiful, yellows and oranges and some brown. And I even added a little bit of gold to give it a little bit of a shimmer. You don't see it very well in this video, but I do like how it works in person with that gold. The next step would be to work on the background. But first, we'd have to remove the old masking fluid. You can see the hair there. It looks kind of pretty, I think. Maybe a little bit reminiscent of Klimt. I don't know. Next, I needed to remask the area that I wanted to protect, and gonna work on the background. Again, the colors I chose were ones I thought would complement the main subject. I wanted the hair to kind of be the star, so using a lot of maybe complementary opposites or a little bit cooler colors, and I think overall that ended up working fairly well. And here you can see the alcohol markers and how they were a little bit of a challenge to get to be smooth, but I think in this case it looks kind of interesting, so I think I will choose to be pleased. And I had a couple other ideas that I wanted to explore. And one of them was to use this instrument, and this is called a ruling pen. I used to do a lot of drafting by hand, and we used to use these in some situations, particularly when we wanted to do unique colors with our lines, because you can easily change the ink that's in them. But it also happens to be perfect for putting on masking fluid. You just dip it right in there, and then you can basically just draw your masking fluid and you'll end up with a nice thin line. I think my ruling pen had some India ink still in it, and that's why this masking fluid is having a little bit of a darker color. This is perfectly fine. It's all going to come off at the end. And actually, some people do this intentionally, put some sort of color in the masking fluid so that you're able to see it on the paper. That is one thing that I wanted to try using the ruling pen. And the other thing I want to try we'll see in a little bit here. But first I wanted to wet the paper with alcohol where I was going to put the ink. In this case I decided I wanted to paint the ink on because I didn't mask off the interior of the skull. It ended up not really mattering a whole lot, but I did that, kind of give it a base color. Then you see I'm doing a bunch of different things. I used some salt and spritz alcohol. So once the background was done, I needed to work on the interior of the skull. So I added masking fluid to the entire background, and you can see here I am basically erasing the ink that I don't want. And this is a real nice thing about having these synthetic papers. They will allow you to erase nearly everything because it really doesn't absorb anything. All these inks lay on the top, and that's fine as long as you're done. You just don't treat it really roughly. But if you want to take something off, you pretty much can. The last thing that I wanted to try was to use oil, which you can see me spraying here. This is just regular cooking oil. And I wanted to see if this would work well with the alcohol inks as far as maybe spreading it out or making some interesting patterns with the ink. Alcohol is miscible in water, and so I figured it probably wouldn't do well with oil, or it might get kind of messy, and I wasn't sure how this would go. And I think the experiment worked overall. The ink did want to separate from the oil, and so you did end up with some nice little kind of bubbly looks, and that was what I was after. It is a mess, and I'm not sure this is the best way to do it, but I'll take it because it ended up giving me a result that I liked. I also added a little bit of gold just to give it a little shimmery look. And I ended up really liking the patterns that happened because of the oil. It almost gave it a celestial sort of look. Maybe stars or nebula, and yeah, I kind of liked the effect that it gave. But I also said that it was messy, and it is. It didn't want to dry. It stayed oily for a long time. But as I worked with it with these paper towels, it didn't seem to disturb the ink much, just basically pulled up most of the oil. So, maybe that works. Taking off that masking fluid and left me with those nice white lines. And I think I really ended up liking this. It has a really cool look. At least I think it does. Let me know what you think. Thanks a lot for joining me today, and we'll have another video for you very soon. Thanks a lot, and see you later.